Welcome to the 14th edition of the COP interview series hosted by the UN Women Training Center's Community of Practice. I'm Maria Ligari, COP and Virtual Dialogue Consultant for the Training Center, and I'm going to be our moderator today. And I'm very lucky to be joined by Margarita Ozonas Marcos, who will be speaking to us about gender-responsive budgeting, which we will call GRB throughout the session, and training for gender equality. So allow me to explain that this COP interview series features interviews with experts on a range of topics that are related to training for gender equality. We've been holding these interviews since June, and this will be the last one that we hold for this year, but hopefully we'll pick them up again in the new year. And each interview lasts for about half an hour, and our listeners have the chance to ask questions live if they send in their questions using the chat tab on the right-hand side of the WebEx platform. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest for today. Margarita Ozonas Marcos is an international gender equality economist, researcher, and training specialist. She has expertise in the fields of development, gender equality, and human rights. And her areas of specialization include GRB, studies and methodologies for costing violence against women using a GRB approach, women's economic rights, program evaluation, and the development of methodologies and tools using a gender-sensitive approach. Over the past 10 years, she's worked with a range of NGOs and international organizations, including UNIFEM, UN Women in Central America, Mexico, and Asia. Last year and this year, Marga delivered 2 courses on GRB for the UN Women Training Center. These include an online course and a Train the Trainers course focused on GRB. She's also designed a GRB training package for the Training Center in 2015 and 2016. So Marga, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the UN Women Training Center for inviting me to participate in this set of interviews. Thank you to everyone who is listening. Thanks.
Great. It's our pleasure to have you here. And I think we can begin maybe by asking about, speaking a little bit about your personal experience of training for gender equality. So I'd like to ask you perhaps what prompted your interest in working in the field of gender equality, and especially in the field of gender responsive budgeting, or GRB, and also specifically how you came to be a gender trainer.
Yes, my interest in gender and development started during my university studies. I was studying economics, and the only subject that really interested me was called structural economics, where we studied the economy in a global context and do fair economic relationships among different countries in the world. Because of this, I became inspired to use my skills to work in the field of human rights. I think that somehow I was inspired as well by my parents, as they supported a development project in the Amazon jungle, and they lived there for many years in the 70s. So I was always listening to the stories, and I was very inspired by them. So for that, I decided to do a master's degree in international cooperation, and I found many of subjects interesting, but gender studies was the field that really captured my interest. Mm-hmm. That was really the beginning of my career, and I think today that it was one of the best decisions in my life, as I still had time to move my professional career into the field I like. So after the master's degree, I went to work in Costa Rica with UNIFEM, now UN Women, supporting a program called Women's Economic Agenda, which focused on gender and economics. And gender-responsive budgeting was one of the components of this program. So the first time I heard about this concept of gender-responsive budgeting, or GRB, was in 2007. And during the 2 years that I was in Costa Rica, I had my first experience in the field of GRB, conducting national research on the individual and institutional capacities for GRB in Costa Rica. And also during this time, I had my first experience as a gender trainer, giving trainings to rural women to teach them how to participate in the negotiations of the Central America Free Trade Agreement in order to protect their economic rights. So after Costa Rica, I worked with UN Women in Mexico, Central America, and later in Thailand, which is the regional office of Asia. Mm-hmm. And since 2013, I have been working as an international consultant on gender equality, specializing in GRB. So really, I think that I have been supporting GRB initiatives from different angles over the last 10 years, including delivering workshops. I'm not sure how many workshops I have done, maybe around 50. And because of this background, I was hired to design and deliver a training package on GRB for the UN Women Training Center in 2015, as you said. This training package includes 3 courses on GRB with different methodologies, self-paced, moderated online course that takes almost 3 months, and a face-to-face course that takes 1 week. So we launched these courses in 2016. This year it has been the second edition. So in my experience as a trainer, I think I have to say that there is a before and after, because I feel I have really professionalized my skills as a gender trainer is working for a training center. I would also like to say that I had a mentor throughout this process, Elizabeth Roberts, who is a training specialist from the training center. He provided me a lot of guidance, and I'm very thankful to her.
That's fantastic. Elizabeth was also one of our COP interview series interviewees, so that was very good. And I wonder why, because as you said, like you've focused on this area of GRB, and I wonder why you feel specifically that training on GRB is an important way of promoting women's economic rights and gender equality.
Yes. The first thing that we have to understand when tackling gender inequality are the obstacles to achieving gender equality. Gender-based discrimination is still a problem in our country. So to get an idea of the scope of the problem, we can check the gender gaps in all sectors and other indicators such as the prevalent rate of gender-based violence. For example, every 10 minutes around the world, a woman is killed by a man according to the United Nations. Then once we have a panorama of the situation in a particular context, plus we have gender-sensitive data that can help to determine the scope of inequality and gender discrimination in a particular context, then we need gender-sensitive policies to address all these problems and to accelerate gender equality and outcomes. And for this reason, it's very important to provide training on GRB, because GRB is a tool that serves for planning policies with adequate budget to address gender inequalities and to push for gender equality. So GRB is a tool. And GRB is aligned with the principles of good governance, and that entails transparency, participatory mechanisms, and accountability, among other things. Therefore, trainings on GRB can be oriented to civil servants or to agents outside the government. Civil society can learn how to participate in the planning and budgeting process and how to advocate to claim their rights. So I think that addressing gender inequality is complex for several reasons, and change is often visible from one generation to the next. For example, in my family, I can perceive changes from my grandmother's generation to my mother's generation to mine. So I think that GRB helps identify where and how gender inequalities occur, and most importantly, shows what can be done to promote gender equality and social justice.
Excellent. And I wonder, you said that GRB can be adapted to be directed towards stakeholders. And I wonder what kind of approaches that you use when you're designing and delivering and evaluating training on GRB. Like, how do you contextualize also these training initiatives to the specific stakeholders involved?
Yes, as Elizabeth showed me, I follow the steps of the training cycle: the needs assessment, course design, course implementation, and evaluation. So the first step focuses on getting information on the profile of participants, their existing knowledge of GRB, their interests, and also their training needs. To get this information, I prepare a training needs assessment and also a questionnaire to get a baseline. If it's possible, for example, the online courses allow to do that, also the face-to-face course. Then I analyze all this information, and based on this, I design the course content. In GRB, it's very important to differentiate between different profiles of stakeholders inside and outside the government, as each one has a particular role. First, there are some agencies inside the government, for example, the Ministry of Finance and planning agencies, the Ministry of Women's Affairs, sector ministries, parliamentarians, also local governments sometimes. On the other hand, kids outside the government are women's groups, civil society organizations, research centers, among others. Sometimes also the role of international organizations, especially in developing countries, is important. For example, UN Women has supported 75 experiences around the world up to date. So the course design and the methodology depend to a great extent on the profile of stakeholders. If there is a mix of profile, for example, people from UN, from the government, and from civil society organizations, the course design is more challenging because each stakeholder will be interested in exploring how to improve their own skills in relation to their particular position. However, experience has shown that gender responsibility initiatives are more successful in countries where groups inside and outside the government work together. So in the end, it's good to learn GRB in a holistic way. Exploring synergies among stakeholders and working together in practical exercises, discussing different point of views. So that's good. Um, Regarding the course evaluation, a common procedure is to share an evaluation template with some questions to score different elements, but also to give a space for open questions to gathering recommendations to improve the training. I think that such questions are important because you can get inputs about what worked well and what could be improved. For example, one common request I received in the most recent evaluation of the courses I delivered was to focus on fewer tools in a more in-depth way, rather than learning about more tools but sacrificing the depth. Because I don't remember how many tools we presented in the last face-to-face course, but maybe uh, like 15. So at the end, you can learn too much, no, on 15 specific tools. So this is something that I will consider for the next courses. I'm planning to focus on specific tools, such as gender impact assessment, which is one of the most recurrent tools in GRB.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about this kind of tool, or maybe other tools and methods that you use that you find particularly useful in the context of GRB, like training on GRB.
Yeah, sure. I think that sharing real GRB tools is definitely a good practice. And I have found that some course participants have never even seen a budget, for example. And that's crazy, no? Like you want to study GRB, but you never have seen a budget. Or to know what a budget in their organization looks like. So I normally provide real budget documents, real policy documents, and real GRB tools used in a particular country. So they can see what they look like and they can work with them in a practical exercise. When I have the list of participants for a course, I normally do some research in Google to see if I am able to find GRB tools, budgets, or policy documents from the participants' countries. In this way, the training is really context-based. That's difficult because sometimes you don't find this information, but often there are some documents that yes, you can find that. Another method to discuss are case studies. However, it can be challenging to get case studies that tell the whole story. What worked well, what didn't, lesson learned, all that. So the issue is that you can only prepare this information if you have access to in-depth reports such as evaluations, or if you have been involved directly in the GRD experience. For me, for example, as a consultant, it's good to combine technical consultancy so I can learn also working and providing trainings because I can use things that I learn in my consultancies for the trainings. Otherwise, you miss the substance of the case studies. For my next course, for example, I'm considering developing case studies of experiences I have been involved in to compare them, assess them, and discuss them. We also used another methodology in the last face-to-face course that I found particularly interesting. It was called the Web of Institutionalization. The economist Karen Levy designed this methodology, and it's very revealing as it shows certain elements that need to be considered for institutionalizing GRD. These are a few of my preferred methods and tools. Of course, there are other like videos, technical exercise, advocacy exercise, etc.
And I wonder, like, when you're using these kinds of methods and tools, I wonder if the experience is different when you're training in an online setting versus a face-to-face setting. Because, for example, you have extensive experience of designing and delivering online courses, such as the course on GRB for the training center. And I wonder if you think that there are any particular challenges or maybe opportunities as well of training in an online setting versus training in face-to-face.
Yes. The first challenge that comes to my mind is that everybody has a good internet connection. In past courses, we have had participants from countries such as Rwanda, Malawi, who have really bad connections, power cuts, or people working even in rural areas such as without internet. So I remember, for example, a Skype call that I arranged with a team from Malawi to discuss a practical exercise. I think we must have lost connection at least 10 times. It was really exhausting due to power cuts. And I think that the Skype call took almost 2 hours, but we did it. So it was a nice experience to be there. But another challenge is the time difference, especially for the web conferences. In the past courses, we have participants from Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. So it was impossible to find a time that suited everybody perfectly to attend the web conferences. On the other hand, one of the benefits of online courses is just that they make it possible for an international audience to participate simultaneously. And this is something very difficult to achieve in a face-to-face course, mostly because it can be too expensive for participants to travel long distances or to pay for accommodation and other expenses. Regarding the methodologies, the online courses allows the usage of certain methods such as discussion forums, and this comes with both benefits and challenges. To start with the challenges, participants lose a certain level of spontaneity in their communications. I will say that discussions in a face-to-face course format allows for a more natural flow, while online courses have a different rhythm. They tend to be more technical, more detailed, and less spontaneous. On the other hand, it's possible to share a link or to share a document, so that's good because you can get documents. But lack of spontaneity is a challenge for the trainer because through spontaneous reactions and even by the body language, it's easy to identify gaps in knowledge or misunderstanding or even disagreements. So that's something.
I wonder if we could speak a little bit, because you raised the issue of, disagreements and gaps of knowledge, and I wonder if, when you're delivering training that, challenges power inequalities and advocates for costed budgets, for example, have you ever encountered any resistances to this kind of training? And if you have, how have you overcome these resistances?
Yes, sure. Well, the first challenge is to demonstrate that public budgets, both revenues and expenditures, affect men and women differently. I mean that not all segments of population benefit to the same degree. For example, a cut in a health policy may seem neutral in terms of gender. However, in many countries it has been proven how women are more adversely affected than men due to the fact that women tend to take care of dependents at home. And as a result, when sick people receive less public health care, those who usually take care of this unpaid work are women, and more concretely, women with few economic resources who cannot afford private medical services. So showing concrete examples, such as the one I mentioned, is a good strategy to show how budgetary decisions affect groups of women and men differently, and how they can aggravate gender inequality, or on the contrary, how they can be used to promote equal access to resources, services, and opportunities. The second challenge, I think, consists in balancing the knowledge of the people involved in GRB. While civil servants who work in the budget departments know about finances, they normally don't know anything about gender. On the other hand, the gender focal points in institutions tend to have a reverse situation. They know a lot about gender, but nothing about finances. So in the experiences of GRB, as I said before, it's good to work with both agents, but also it's necessary to train them in the areas they don't know. And finally, I think a good practice is to convince those who show resistance to the topic is to use strong data. So it's not the same to talk about gender equality or gender inequality in general terms, or to use strong data mentioning, for example, that in a country, 45% of women are unemployed, 70% not receive a pension, or I don't know, that in the parliament, there isn't any women in the parliament. So another good practice related also with the data, and this is from my experience working in the studies on costing violence, is to use this data to show how gender inequality affects in a negative way the development or economic growth in a country. For example, a study in Vietnam in 2012 showed that due to domestic violence, it was a loss of productivity just over 2.6% more or less. That was on the GDP.
And do you ever notice that there is a difference perhaps between resistances in online settings and face-to-face settings? Like, for example, if you want to present, if you notice that a participant in a face-to-face course is perhaps resistant or maybe argues about things and you want to present additional data, that might be, do you think it's easier in a face-to-face setting to address these resistances sort of head-on and work with them rather than in an online setting where perhaps it may not be so apparent which participants are more resistant to the issue?
I think that the use of data serves for all kind of trainings, because I think that data speaks up for itself. So both any method is good. The thing is that in the face-to-face course, as I said, the body language is or something that say, no, I don't agree with that, something like this, no? So
Mm-hmm.
you can identify this kind of reactions, and then you can identify who has a specific thought or challenge or a different opinion. Also, you can speak with this person in a private sphere. For example, I remember a consultancy I did in Iraq, in the Kurdish region. And there was a man, it was from the government, so they have to attend this workshop like in a compulsory way. It was a man that he was, I don't know, very, he was, he disagreed with everything since the beginning, and I had to speak with them in a private way. And then he changed a little bit more the reactions, but the body language, he was like sitting, I don't know. So sometimes it's the attitude of people also, and if these people is willing or not to learn.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, the online courses, normally people do these courses because they want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same that the government says, you have to do that, no? So the perception and the interest then is different. But in any case, when you use data and you document everything, people change the mind.
Mm-hmm. I think yes, it's definitely a very persuasive argument. And as you said about, your experience with this gentleman in Iraq, I wonder, because you have such a long-standing experience of training in GRB, I wonder if you would like to share maybe a motivational story about from one of your training experiences, or various stories, perhaps different stories, whether when you have experienced or witnessed change either in participants or in yourself through training for gender equality, and specifically training on GRB.
Yes, the online course, for example, the one that we are providing in the training center that takes almost 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of 3 months, you are like really connected to the people. I don't know, you are designed to see the face, no? Because you have been working with them almost 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they have to do a practical exercise and to analyze our policy stage and also the budget. So for me, for example, this course, we got so many positive feedback at the end of the course. And I remember, for example, a team from Honduras who were analyzing a health policy in the country. In the team, there was a woman who was working in the National Institute of Women's Affairs. I remember that they were analyzing this policy and the budget. And throughout all this process, they got insights that served to propose changes inside the institution, but at the same time, they were doing the exercise. So at the end of the course, we had a final discussion forum to assess the utility of the practical exercise. And this woman said that thanks to the exercise, she managed to refine the health policy in Honduras to be more gender sensitive, and also that she felt that paying for this course was the best educational investment in her life. So when I saw that, I was wow! It was so happy,
Mm-hmm.
and it was for me. I was really touched by that, and also remember many cases like another from Spain. There was a team from the Basque Country that they were analyzing the employment policy in the region, and they were assessing if the European Union regulations in terms of gender mainstreaming were reflected in the regional employment policy in the Basque Country. So one of the team members was a mayor from a municipality in the Basque Country, and he said also in the evaluation of the course that thanks to the practical exercise, he felt that he had improved his skills to propose improvements to gender mainstreaming in employment policy. So for me also that was a great achievement because you feel that the course served for something, no? I could say more stories, but maybe
No, I think it's excellent. And I wonder if you've ever had an experience maybe of you personally, either when you're attending training or when you're delivering it, because it must be such. One thing that I think I've really noticed from the COP interview series in general is that training is a very personal experience, as well as you have to be very professional, and it's also, as you mentioned, it's about data, it's about tools, it's about very practical aspects, but it's also really about connections between people. And I wonder if you would like to share maybe a story also of how you changed through training.
Yes, sure. I can say that personally, for me, it has been hard to facilitate both online courses in Spanish and English at the same time. Because imagine the course is 3 months. You have I don't know how many participants, and they are analyzing policies and budgets from different countries. So it's a hard work to follow up all that, no? So you have to be with them. You have emails, Skype calls sometimes. You have to review the exercise on that. So doing this job requires the ability to analyze policies, budgets, monitoring mechanisms, language skills, all that. So for me, it has been a time-consuming work, exhausting sometimes, But for me, when you see at the end evaluations and I don't know, all the effort, also the interest of participants, for example, these people that I mentioned before from Malawi, the Skype call, that they are there, no? They have interest on the call, they are learning, you feel that it's useful somehow. So then it's, I don't know, you renew your energy. So you are very tired during 3 months, and at the end you feel, wow, I did it. And then I still want to keep the contact with them, no? So to see what happened, if there is an improvement, I don't know. It's nice. You feel also that you establish like a kind of a relationship with the participants.
Yes, I think very much so. I think what you're speaking about, this dialectic between trainers and trainees, I think that really reflects this idea that the training center has of training for gender equality being this sort of co-production of knowledge, not a circulation of knowledges, and not just a sort of top-down kind of education or anything. It's more a shared creation, and I think this dialectic really does reflect that a lot. And I want you just, before we close, because one of the courses that's going on with the Training Center now, one of the most sort of important things for this year has been the certification of trainers. And at the beginning of the interview, you mentioned just a little bit in passing, you said that you've really learned by doing, like that your experience as a trainer has really been on the job. And I wonder if what you think about the idea of professionalization. Do you think that is an academic or theoretical grounding? Does that have to take pride of place, or is it really a job or a sector where you have to learn by doing?
I think that everyone has a particular way of learning. Mine is learning by doing. So, for example, each time that I have a consultancy, I learn a lot because you have to research, read, discuss with the people. The contexts are different. Sometimes there are similarities, but the challenges are different. The technical issues, sometimes you have a kind of data, sometimes it's missing, I don't know what. So for me, my best method to learn is learning by doing. I have to say that I also have been trained myself. For example, I have done a postgraduate on GRB in Flaxo, and I don't know, I have other studies that I'm not going to mention because it's not the purpose. But it's fun. I think combining everything, reading, taking courses, doing, but also doing, no? So, for example, I think if you take a course and the course implies a practical dimension, it's good to take the risk to try to change something, no? And that's the thing I wanted to do when I designed these courses, no? To find the practical way, the practical utility for the courses. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Marco. We've run out of time, but your interview was exceptionally interesting and exceptionally, shed such a good light on both on GRB and on training for GRB, especially. And I don't know if you want to end on anything else.
No. Have a nice day, everybody, and it was a pleasure to participate.
Okay. Thank you so much, Marca. And we'll have this interview available on the UN Women Training Center's YouTube channel. So we hope that many more people will be able to listen in and to learn from your experience. And again, thank you very much for joining us today.
Okay. Thank you, Ruya.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.